So I just have 3 questions for the brand generator.
Sure, go ahead.
First is just what does it do? Just trying to kind of get a baseline so that we have a little bit of chat about what it does before we talk about how it does it or why it's important.
Sure. So, like, I guess it was about like 3 years ago or 2 years ago. Ochier and I were rebuilding the Dad's Tie application, and I wasn't wholly convinced that the brand at the time was getting the job done. I think since then, at least over the last few months, we've noticed a really good conversion rate.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's really worth us rebranding it. Maybe we can do some logo work with the guys, but bottom line is, at the time I was really trying to rack my brain and think, like, what would be a better brand. And it occurred to me that there must be some consistency in brand recognition among some of the more popular brand names that kind of sell themselves.
And similar.
Right, similarities, consistencies, commonalities, whatever you want to call them. And at the time, I was actually doing, Chris had an application called Memory AI, which is an artificial intelligence, or it's augmented intelligence application for memory recall. So it does context analysis, where you're basically like, you could say something like, where's the last place I had a cheeseburger? And it would be like, okay, the last time that you ate something was, based off of your geolocation, your recorded memories, your social media behavior, it would recognize the last restaurant that you went to, if it was a burger joint, if it's an American fare joint, based off of Google Local. So it's using Google Local data to sort of be like, okay, the last place that you went was that had served burgers was the 5 Spot in Habersham Village last Thursday with Brie.
Yeah.
And it would return to you that sort of information. So it's a lot more detail than you were really asking for. And so we were doing a lot of augmented intelligence type stuff, and I thought to myself, there must be something related to context or related to commonalities that were similar to what it is that we were working on there that I could apply towards branding, but without using any of those algorithms. So from an IP standpoint, we're talking about completely different things. It's just sort of a theory, a concept that occurred to me. Here I am thinking about augmented intelligence. How can this apply? And so what I wanted to do was and what it does do to sort of ask the question, what does the brand generator do? It was come up with an idea that could implement an unbiased algorithm to identify what could be eventually a highly recognizable brand. Just
not only recognizable, but recognizable in a specific field or industry.
Right. So one of the things that I had mentioned to Steven when he brought this up like a week ago or so was like, and I'm sure you remember this conversation, was like that second part of what it is that you said there, it's almost a leading question. You're like, does it really matter whether or not it's part of that field? Because when you look at some of the brands out there that really are performing very well in their field, they don't, from a sector analysis standpoint, there's no similarity between the brand name and what it is they do.
No, yeah,
so like
absolutely.
Target, what the hell does the word Target have anything to do with being a retailer? Nothing. Yeah. Unless you're sort of like targeting the right price and targeting the right product. But that's a bit of a stretch. I don't know if that's what they were going for.
It's more to the point would be like Walmart. That makes sense.
Right. The Walton's Market,
exactly.
Right. And then Amazon. You've got Amazon. I mean, granted, Amazon obviously started off as just a bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
and became something altogether different. But even so, what does the Amazon have anything to do with selling books other than like cutting down trees to make the paper, right?
And a cute smile from A to Z.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the point, is that you don't necessarily need to be focused on the field. What you need to be focused on is the commonality, because like the truth is, if you are thinking to yourself, hey, I have to come up with a brand that makes sense in this field, you're automatically, instantly spoiling the data.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea was to come up with an algorithm that does not have, it doesn't lean any direction towards anything as being more or less relevant.
Mm-hmm.
It's just looking at objects, and it's looking at their properties, and it's looking for similarities between those properties.
Yeah.
So any object in the world has properties in object-oriented programming, just like this mug right here has a color, it's got a material, it's like ceramic or whatever. I don't know. I'm not a mug maker. I don't know these things. So it's like it's got a color, which is white. It used to be white before I drank a lot of coffee. It's got a material, which is ceramic. It's got a handle. It's got a volume, right? There's a volume of how much liquid it could contain. It's got dimensions of some nature, and it's got, like height and width and I guess diameter and circumference, and it's got a finish, like a shiny or matte finish, right? And it's got like a shape of the I guess like a beveled shape. Like yours has got a nice sort of like rounded beveled sort of approach, and mine is very kind of like straight edged and all that stuff. And so it's got all these properties, right? And words have properties like that too. So you've got the number of letters that exist in a word. You've got the part of speech that the word has. You've got whether or not it starts or ends in a consonant or a vowel. You've got whether or not what character it starts and ends with. You've got the number of syllables. You've got the sounds that they make. So there are, like we talked about before, like microphones have plosives, right? So plosives are types of sounds, right? And then there are pronunciation patterns. So the dictionary has pronunciation patterns. You've got sharp A's, you've got long A's, hard vowels of this, that, and the other thing, and all that kind of stuff, right? You've got silent letters and things like that. And then you've got patterns, letter patterns. You've got things like the number of consecutive consonants, the number of consecutive vowels. You've got different sort of patterns that relate to the English language, like letter pairings that are commonly used, like a double M versus a single M that has a certain pronunciation pattern associated with it, THs and things like that, that create a different sound. And so those are all properties that belong to a word before you even get into the definition and the relevance of it, because relevance in itself is a property, right? Yeah. I suppose relevance is more of it's a relationship, because you're talking about how one object relates to another. So that's part of the issue, I guess, is you're spoiling the data by considering relevancy, because relevancy really isn't a property either. It's a relationship between two objects' properties. So when you're talking about how it relates to the field, the question is like, what are we considering causing a brand to relate to its field? Is it simply the sector that exists within? Is it the products that they sell? What is it that we as humans automatically identify something and recognize something as being relevant to another? And a lot of that is subconscious.
No,
most of it, yeah. And so it's really difficult to kind of say, like, okay, one way or another, like, all right, Amazon is a retailer, Target is a retailer, without knowing that in advance, without actually being informed of that data. So, like, you'd have to go into your algorithm and actually start spoiling the data by saying, like, okay, Amazon is a retailer today of books 10 years, 20 years ago. It's a marketplace today. Yeah. And if you're looking at the way that the laws are changing overseas, like in India, they're trying to force companies like Amazon to become less of a retailer of their own product and more of a marketplace. One or the other, like choose, you got to choose, right? So that's going to keep changing. Things that won't keep changing, though, are like the properties of that brand that make it recognizable. People recognize Microsoft for certain things like Windows, but they also recognize it for Xbox and things like that, right? The relevancy to the marketplace constantly changes, but the brand name still stands out. And people might look at it and say, okay, this is what they do now, and this is what they did then. But other people they might just recognize it because it's a household brand name, and they recognize it for what it does now, not necessarily for what it did back then. So that's a constantly dynamically changing value, and it's also when you're looking at that value, which is like, what do they do, and you're trying to figure out how it relates to the sector or marketplace or whatever, you're looking at it quite literally in relation to other ones. That's why it's what the word relates to means, right? So is it relevant? Well, in order to find out if it's relevant, you have to compare it against other ones. So what the brand generator really does is it takes all of the properties of an object of a word. So like I said before, letter count, syllable count, sounds, pronunciation patterns, letter patterns, things like that. And then it also is adding into that field of really sort of concrete, what's the word I might use to describe those, vernacular, related, properties. That set is being added to a set of what are more or less definition properties. Like, what's the definition of the word? What are its synonyms? What are its antonyms? What categories does it belong to? What categories does it have? Because generally speaking, they exist. A lot of words exist within a hierarchy of some sort of like categorical structure, just like scientific notation works. So like you've got your I guess if you're going to talk about like family and species, right? You might be talking about like a model number for a computer, right? And then the brand of that computer, and then maybe it's got like a chipset, right? That has not maybe, but it's got a chipset that has a certain brand name, right? So it belongs to a category of Intel products, right? But it has properties of this, that, or the other thing. I guess a better example might be like science fiction is a type of fiction, which is a type of literature. And science fiction has types of science fiction horror, science fiction fantasy, science fiction whatever. So it sits within this like hierarchy of has types or has categories and is type of and is part of category. So that belongs within those sort of definitions. So you've got synonyms, you've got antonyms, you've got definitions, you've got all those category related things. And then you've got things like, in addition to like trying to identify all of the definitions related to that specific word, every word has a root word that goes back to either Germanic or Latin roots, right? So you've got a root word.
Speaking of English.
Yeah. So you've got a root word, you've got a prefix, and you've got a suffix. Generally speaking, I mean, you don't necessarily always have to have all of them, right? But so those are each called word parts, and the dictionary does break those down for you. So you've got to analyze the prefix, the root word, and the suffix individually, because each of them have their own. As a whole, a dictionary word might have all of those definition properties, synonyms and antonyms, definitions and parts and categories, etc. But so do each prefix and suffix, and they also have the sort of vernacular properties of and phonetic properties. It's probably a better word to describe them, I guess. Your syllables and your pronunciation patterns and your sounds and so forth. So your vernacular properties, your phonetic properties, and your definition properties all belong to both prefix, suffix, and root word. And each of those need to be individually defined or described, because each of those then, in order to generate a brand, you may want to reuse those. So you'll see like a lot of like shitty brand generators out there that come up with things like I don't know, oh, we're a design company, so let's call ourselves Designify or Designly or the Lees and the Fies, right? Yeah. And they're basically doing that from a really elementary level. And so what we're doing is sort of taking it beyond that step and saying, okay, well, just because the Lees and the Fies exist doesn't mean they're the only way to go about things. And we've seen for the most part that they don't really work. So what prefixes and suffixes do work, and what root words do work? And of those root words, what word or of full words, like bookkeeping is a word that has 3 sections to it. You've got book, you've got keep, and you've got ing, right? Mm-hmm. We can break those apart, and we can analyze each individual word part and identify all 3 of the vernacular, phonetic, and definition properties of each of those to see what commonalities exist within a brand set that we want to be related to, without actually having to say, okay, Target exists within industry, Walmart exists within industry, and Amazon exists within industry. We could say like Amazon, Walmart, Target, what do they have in common? Okay, so by breaking those apart and getting each of those properties, we can then find consistency within those properties. So can I use this board for a second?
Yeah.
So like as an example, without giving out too much about how it is that it works, give me like 3 example brands. Just
do Newegg, Best Buy, and another tech retail store.
Newegg, Best Buy, and then another tech retail store.
You could say Amazon.
Yeah, I guess I could say Amazon, right? Might as well, right? That's actually a good example.
A to Z.
Yeah. So, all right, so we've got 3 here, right? So this has got 2 words here, new and egg. Best Buy has 2 words here, and Amazon's got 1. So we're able to analyze each of these. Okay, so now we're looking at this and we're saying, okay, 1, 2, 3 word parts have 3 characters. So 3 times 3 word parts has 3 characters. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We've got one that's got 4, and we've got one that's got 6. That's for our word parts. That's one property. The next property is the word in total. So we're looking at 6, 6, and 7, right? So 6 times 2 and 7 times 1. So the consistency of the property of letter count exists within 50% of, or actually, what are we looking at here? Yeah, more than 50%. So that's 3 out of 5, so 60% of the word part. So 60% of the word part exists. There exists a commonality of 3 characters per word part. So that's actually weighted at basically a 0.6 scale, right? So this, and this within this sample set are far more consistent and relevant. That 6 out of 10 times or 3 out of 5 times there's a 3-letter word part means that when we're analyzing the 3 of these, generally speaking, we're going to want a 3-letter word part.
Yeah.
That's going to be weighted more. We start and end, let's see, consonant, 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 vowel, sometimes Y, right? So consonants are more consistent in the beginning and the end of each word, of each brand word.
So that part will be weighted as well.
Exactly. And then the consistency of 6-letter word counts, not word part counts, is more consistent at 66%. So you're going to see, okay, this one right here is the most common number of word part characters and the most common number of total characters, right? So words that are most similar to this pattern, where it's got 6 letters and 3 and 3, are going to be weighted the highest.
And ends and begins with the consonant.
Right, exactly. Are going to be weighted the highest. And then you're going to get into sort of like, then you start having to ask yourself, okay, double characters. This has got double G's. Do I see any double characters out here? No. Do I see 2 consecutive consonants fairly consistently? I see it a couple times. I see it here. I see it here. Do we see any double or any 2 consecutive vowels? No. So generally speaking, we're looking for words that have letters which are consistently unique.
Yeah.
And then we're looking at different. We're seeing a lot of E's here. Are the sounds, the word sounds that they're making? This is a sort of an oo and this is a different E. Between oo and egg and best. These are sort of different pronunciation patterns which are not consistent. So then what it's doing is sort of taking all of these consistencies and it's weighting them. So
And then what does it do with these weights?
So it analyzes them against the entire English language. So every single word that exists within the English language has these different properties that we can analyze, just like we analyze the 3. So what the generator does is it looks at 300,000 plus words within the English language that includes. So the English language itself, I should for any trolls out there, the English language itself has a certain number of words, and the number of words that we analyze is far higher than that, because there are words that are outside of the English language that are sort of like invented. Newegg as a brand is an example of a word that we consider a word, even though it has 2 words that belong to it. Spotify is not a word, but we consider it a word. Spot and the suffix "-fi" or whatever are individually their own entities, but as one we include that as an additional word. So rather than just 2, you've got 3. So every combination that we assemble as well, when we're doing this, we include in the growing database. So it's a learning algorithm. As people use it, it grows and it becomes smarter. So the idea is like really, it's taking those commonalities between prefix, root words, and suffixes, and it's combining them all. So get all the commonalities, it combines them all, and then it re-ranks them. So it ranks everything in the English language based off of weighted commonality from the brands that you provide it in a sort of descending order. Then there's a permutation that goes through that combines all of those parts that sit within the top X percentile. So I think it's about 8%. Top 8% get taken, and that'll change over time. It might be 5%, 10%, depending upon how much data we have. And then it'll take all of those parts that are cut out and exist within that one subset, and then the permutation sort of combines them. So you're going to end up with things like, like, I don't know, let's say egg is consistently found there. You might see like eggly and eggify and like pre-egg and things like that, right? And then it re-ranks those, and then after it re-ranks those, it chops them again. So it's creating new brands from all of those matching commonality, or common and similar word parts, prefixes, root words, and suffixes. And then after it combines them, it treats them as if they're existing dictionary words and reanalyzes them.
Okay.
So that's kind of soup to nuts how it works. There's a lot more that goes into it that I can't really describe because we don't want to give away all of our IP. But yeah, that's more or less how it works. And
what it does.
And what it does, yeah.
So then, why do you think it's important that someone would use it?
Well, I think that it's easy to waste a ton of money in marketing spend to try to drive a brand that carries no brand recognition. I think it's really hard for people nowadays whose attention spans are very limited to actually look at a name that is not easily recognizable and try to remember it. And like a great example is like that Rakuten name. Terrible brand name.
Rakuten.
And they've just been, Yeah, so like Rakuten, I don't know how to pronounce it, and I don't think anyone really does.
This is you're outlining the problem.
Yeah. There, so like a number of years ago, we started doing all of these commission-based monetization partnerships with companies like Walmart and Nordstrom Rack and things like that. And at the time, I think it was Walmart and Nordstrom, all of their commission-based sales went through Rakuten. So like there's like a company like Commission Junction as an example is another one that does most of our partners. Some of our partnerships like Amazon and Target and eBay go directly through Amazon, Target, and eBay. But there are companies out there who basically
middleman it.
Yeah, they middleman it, exactly. And Rakuten is like one of those types of companies. But they're like a much larger brand, and they're a holding company for a lot of retailers that you're familiar with. But nobody knows them by name because the name sucks and nobody knows how to pronounce it. So much so that they're spending millions of dollars on advertisements, on television advertisements, just to get people to pronounce their name correctly.
Yep.
Which is not only just a waste of money, but it's like, why are you trying to force somebody to do something that they can't naturally do? You're never going to succeed in that. And that doesn't mean that Rakuten can't succeed. They've got so much money that it's almost impossible for them not to.
They're just not going to do it very well.
Yeah. I mean, you could be a small business with a lot less money to go in there and really quickly outperform what it is that Rakuten is trying to do just by having a more recognizable brand name like Commission Junction does. Yep. And so I think it's important because you're going to build a company, you're going to hire people, you're going to come up with all these ideas and all this new IP. You're going to come out with different ways of hiring people and creative ways of creating a brand, creating a product. Yeah, but in the end, like,
no one knows how to pronounce
nobody knows how to pronounce your name. You're gonna have a really difficult time getting out there.
Yep.
And that's, I know it sounds silly because it's like when I go buy a car, the last thing I think about is the color or the brand. I'm like really primarily concerned about the functional aspects of that car. But at the same time, I know that if I get a car that if I buy a DeLorean, right? If I buy a car that is a dead brand or going to be a dead brand, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to get parts to replace it. It's going to be very, to repair it rather. So it's going to be very difficult for companies who are out there trying to push their name to do so when people can't figure it out. And I've seen situations like that even with the different iterations of Dad's Tie. Arcane, not so much. But there are brands out there where the pronunciation, it's too difficult to become a household name.
Yeah.
And that's really what you want, is to become a household name. It doesn't even necessarily need to be the pronunciation either. And in truth, part of the reason why people should use it is to get away from the concept that they have to be coming up with a brand name that makes sense for industry. Newegg, from a layman's perspective, has nothing to do with technology.
Yeah, for those that don't know.
Yeah. So, so getting people to get away from this idea that they have to come up with a name that is relevant specifically to the category that they are trying to belong to. That's part of the reason to use this, because they're spoiling their own data by being biased in that approach. And the idea with this algorithm is like, we didn't tell it to do anything.
Well, that's a bit of a stretch.
Well, we programmed it and told it to analyze properties, but there's no difference in handling. Like, the only difference in handling different properties is like when we're using a regular expression for evaluating special characters in pronunciation patterns. So anyway, so that's the only thing that we really made it do. But like that, you have to do that, otherwise it's not going to work. But like, we didn't tell it to handle any property differently than another.
Or well, you kind of do in the sense of you weight the properties. But what I think you're trying to get at here is that.
Well, we don't weight the properties. The algorithm weights the properties. That's the point. Is that it's looking.
I guess that's your point.
It's looking for consistency, and it's not treating any property differently than another. Initially, the only way that it really truly treats some properties different than others is when you're looking at ranges in certain values. So like some values have ranges, like numerical ranges, where your minimum value is 2 and your maximum value is 8, as an example. An example we looked at before, those word parts, right? You had 3, 4, and 7, or 3, 4, and 6, I believe it was, word part lanes. So it doesn't make any sense for us to evaluate anything that's below 3 or higher than 6.
Yeah.
That's
that's
a range.
That's all based off the group that that it's given. It's not. We're not strategically placing any kind of weight on a value before you give it any kind of reason to. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Dad's Tie probably suffered from this. And I mean, obviously, kind of this whole idea came from Dad's Tie because people have, like you said with the other one, people kind of have struggle reading it. And its relation to what it actually does isn't the greatest. I mean, it's kind of a joke that some people still get, but not everybody, I would say.
Right.
So I think we're facing the problem that we're trying to solve or face.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing is, like, I struggled with the idea of, like, okay, do we rebrand this altogether? Because, yeah, there are people who are like, I don't get it. And they look at it and they think, Dad's Tea, or I don't get it, and part of that is like, would camel case help that? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But is camel case in a URL? No.
Exactly.
So does it even matter? No, it totally doesn't matter. But it's, I had no real reason, no data other than the occasional person not understanding it to suggest that didn't work.
Yeah. Because once you know what it does, it's pretty unique in the sense that it's easy to remember. It's only 7 letters, and it's unique. I mean, there's not much out there like that.
Right,
so once you get it, you get it. But it's the fact that you're looking at a list of options that is forever growing, and this is true for every industry across. Options are nothing but becoming more and more prevalent. So you're obviously, when you're looking at a list of options of problems that you're trying to solve, you're going to go to the one that makes sense, especially if it's a completely unknown field to you or a completely unknown experience. You're looking for a new car and you've never heard of a brand before, and all of a sudden Cars R Us pops up, or just cars.com, and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's exactly what I'm looking for. You're not going to go to Buick. What does Buick mean?
Right, but ultimately, will Buick outlast Carvana? Probably.
Yeah. It's just so.
I mean, I shouldn't even say probably, because I haven't even done any of the financial analysis to say that. But I'd be willing to suggest that a car startup, the reseller is going to be outperformed by a more recognizable household brand like Buick. But yeah, there's no. It doesn't have to be relevant. It's just in the case of Dad's Tie, we went for relevancy. Specifically, so we spoiled our own data by doing that.
Yeah.
And it's not the strongest brand, but it's not the worst brand, because we can see in data that the conversion rates are high, and the customer loyalty data historically has been very good. This year, I haven't done much of an analysis, but historically it's been very good. Around the holiday season is really where it performs best, so that's really where we need to do our analysis. But so I would say that if I had the algorithm back when I came up with that, this would be a different name, and it'd be performing better. I have no problem saying that, but I don't know that it necessarily needs to get changed. It's not Rakuten.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad.
It's not that bad. But yeah, I think that's a good explanation, and I think it's a good tool. We've used it for some other products that we're working on and things that are coming up. So we're definitely going to keep tweaking it, and the UI right now is our main focus, making sure that users understand it and have a better, easier time using it. But that's all I kind of wanted to talk about. Do you have anything else you wanted to add to it?
Nope. I just want to figure out why that camera made that sound.
Yeah.
We're both just like
probably turned off.
Yeah, I think it may have. All right. Well, we'll figure that out.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye.